I'm Colleen Myko.
And I'm Peg Tillery. We're here with Darren Strange, the Gardens West Area Manager at Bloedel Reserve on Bainbridge Island.
We're thrilled to film this episode of Planted at one of Kitsap's must-see locations and one of North America's 10 best botanical gardens. Stick around to learn about moss gardening, get a behind-the-scenes composting tour, and Darren will share his motivation for gardening.
Let's get going. Darren, you're an awesome resource on mosses. And moss is the bane of many gardeners. But other gardeners would love to have a moss garden. What's the true definition of a moss garden?
Well, to my knowledge, there is no actual official definition of a moss garden. I suppose you could compare it to rose gardens that are there to display rose species and varieties. Other plants can be found in a rose garden, but they don't detract from the impact of the roses. And it's like that with a moss garden too. In a moss garden, mosses are the stars of the show. Some other plants can be found in and around moss gardens, but the stars of the show are the mosses. And those other plants there are there to complement mosses and not detract from them. In Bloedel Reserve's moss garden, we follow a couple principles in the design and maintenance of the moss garden. First, we create a lot of room for moss to grow, keeping areas clear, provide different surfaces like not just the ground, but also rocks and rotting logs, old stumps, tree flares, tree trunks. The more surface you can provide, the greater diversity of moss species you can encourage to grow in your moss garden. And second, other non-mosses, other plants, are a great addition to any moss garden, but they shouldn't steal the thunder, so to speak, of the mosses. Flowers are certainly okay to have in a moss garden, but they shouldn't grab anyone's attention. They should be either more muted colors or in smaller quantities, and that's what we aim for when we put flowers within the moss garden. Ultimately, our goal at Bloedel Reserve's moss garden is to provide visitors with a sense of a primeval or fairy tale nature in their experience as they go through the moss garden and enjoy the various shades of greens of the mosses. The history of the Bloedel Moss Garden began in 1982, and after the area was cleared, they planted 275,000 starts of...
275,000?
Yep, starts of Irish moss, which wasn't a real moss, but it looks very moss-like. And the intent was that the native mosses would eventually take over and replace the Irish moss, which they did after about 5 years.
Whoa. What are the common mosses that visitors might see when they come to visit Bloedel?
So, as far as we're aware of, we have about 50 species of mosses and liverworts.
50 species?
Yep, here in the moss garden that we know of. But most of the mosses that you'll encounter belong to maybe a couple handfuls, maybe 10 species.
Which you're going to tell us about, right?
Yeah, perhaps the most common one is Menzies tree moss. In fact,
my favorite.
We're standing on some now.
I know, we're on a forest, aren't we?
Yep. It's called a tree moss because it superficially resembles a tree. If you pluck a stem out, it'll have a bare trunk, so to speak, and then a tuft of green branches at the top. And then that's where it gets its tree.
Yeah.
In the sunnier areas of the moss garden.
Wait, there are sunny areas in the moss garden?
Not many, but they're there.
Okay.
It's relatively sunnier.
Okay.
You'll find bent leaf moss. And it's tends to be more of a golden green colored moss. How I can tell I'm looking at bent leaf moss is if you look at it from top down, the stem tips look like little stars. On the ground in the shadier areas of the garden, like this dark green patch even right down there, you'll find Selwyn's smoothcap. It's a darker green moss with upright stems, and it prefers to grow on soils. You won't find it on logs and rocks usually.
Really?
Yep.
Huh.
It's very... A lot of mosses are particular about where they grow. Our largest moss that you'll find in the moss garden, it's bottle brush moss. It's that name from its resemblance to bottle brushes.
Yeah, like you clean your brushes or a pop bottle or something.
Central stem and a lot of spirals around it.
Oh my gosh.
And the stems can get quite large eventually, this tall, and they'll form mounds.
That tall?
Yeah, it doesn't quite look like it. They mat a little bit when you pluck one out.
Oh my goodness.
You almost don't know that it's a moss.
What are the basics of taking care of a moss garden? If I really wanted one, what would the basics be?
It's pretty simple, really. Here in the moss garden, I pull weeds, remove unwanted plants.
Wait. You have to pull weeds
Yes,
in a moss garden?
very carefully.
Okay.
It's, unwanted plants. Sometimes some of the native plants tend to overpopulate.
But you could put them somewhere else?
Yes, they don't have to go home, but they can't stay here.
Okay.
Our goal really is to keep moss growing surfaces clear so that moss can receive optimal light and space.
Becomes the true star.
Yes.
How do you grow moss?
Well, moss is surprisingly easy to grow, or not surprising if you ever had to deal with it on your roof or sidewalk.
Right.
Really, the main ingredient is patience. It just takes time to get moss established.
You have to be patient?
Yep, you do.
Oh dear.
At the Bloedel Reserve, we mostly take one of two different methods. For small mossy spots that were damaged and need repair, we may transplant larger chunks of moss from out of sight areas of the grounds.
So you can actually take it and put it where you want it?
Yes, most mosses will transplant okay like that.
And so you'd have to water mosses too?
We do
sometimes?
Yeah, especially when we're trying to get them established.
Yeah.
Mosses are surprisingly drought tolerant though. I can go on vacation 2 weeks and I don't have to get someone to water for me.
How cool is that?
Yep.
I want that kind of garden. Yeah.
Yeah, if we keep the area where we want moss free of weeds and debris, moss will eventually just fill in and grow on its own. Mother Nature will do the work for you.
Cool.
Yeah, the moss garden has such a large amount of moss here that it's full of spores.
So like, could we be breathing moss spores?
You could potentially be breathing moss spores, but they won't hurt you.
Yay, I like that.
But even in people's home gardens around the Puget Sound, you can get moss to grow the same way.
Yeah.
Because moss spores are really everywhere, and anyone can grow moss if they can just put in the labor to keep the space clear.
Cool. I'm so glad you told our visitors how to grow moss. And for sure come to Bloedel to see it.
Oh yeah, I love to talk with people.
Oh yes, I know. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ever wonder how a big botanical garden tackles its yard waste? I'll give you a hint. They don't put a green bin out at the curb. Here to give us a rare behind-the-scenes tour of Bloedel Reserve's state-of-the-art composting facility is Sean Peterson, compost manager and horticulturist at Bloedel Reserve. Hi, Sean.
Hello, welcome.
We're standing in an area of the reserve that few visitors get a peek at. Can you tell us what we're seeing and why it was built?
We're surrounded by covered bays with garden debris in various stages of decomposition. We built this composting facility a little over a year ago because our volume of leaves, grass clippings, and other types of organic debris collected in the garden ranged from 100 yards to 800 yards depending on the time of year.
I can tell you're excited about this facility. How has it changed your work? And what has it accomplished versus the old system?
It has expanded our capacity, cut the production time, improved the quality of compost, saved us money, and is helping us reduce the spread of harmful plant diseases. Also, by reusing our own garden waste, we reduce the reliance on outside resources and increase the sustainability of our operations.
I love that. Well, I think even for home gardeners who just have a little bit of yard waste, that there's a lot to learn from a facility like this, and like you were saying, how important it is to take advantage of the debris that you already have on site and use it to enrich your soil rather than to just haul it away.
Yes, if material is hauled out of your garden, replace it with some sort of mulch, whether it's mixed or just compost. Mulch has many benefits when applied to your garden beds, which include better water infiltration, weed suppression, and helps build a healthier soil altogether.
This facility features forced air technology. And what are the benefits of that?
The aerated static pile technology allows the composting process to take place without having to turn the piles. Small fans force air through buried pipes into the compost, and sensors make sure the mixture is cooking at optimal temperatures. We can now process compost 3 times faster than before, and a home gardener can speed up the processing of their own compost piles by turning them frequently. Turning compost introduces oxygen needed for the organisms to break down the leaves and the grass clippings.
Yeah, and speaking of grass clippings, that can be a tough one. If it doesn't get enough airflow, it can start to stink. What's your secret?
By adding brown materials, the nitrogen is diluted and the decaying process is slowed down enough that the bad smells are avoided. We get around this smelly problem by taking the slowly rotting leaf material we have from winter and mix it with grass clippings within a day of mowing. The leaves and grass are mixed at an approximate ratio of 3 parts leaves to 1 part grass.
Nice. Well, I noticed a sign that said, bad, good, not sure, ask. And it reminds all of us who are composting that you can't get good compost out if you don't put the right things in the bin.
It's true. This sign helps remind staff and volunteers what materials are welcome in the compost pile. One of the best things to compost is fallen leaves. If you can't leave them in place as a nutritious natural mulch, compost them. Putting them in the trash is such a waste.
I agree. It's mulch nature's way, right? And it's free. What do you appreciate most about this new way of doing things?
This facility is great. It is a goal of ours here at Bloedel to minimize the amount of waste that we create. If more people started to compost more at home, then we would be sending less to landfills. Composting can also help reduce the greenhouse gases, promoting uptake of carbon dioxide by vegetation. The composting goal of us here at Bloedel is to achieve as close to 100% recycling of our organic debris as possible.
Well, that's a wonderful goal, and I hope you reach it. And excellent information, Sean. Thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome, and keep on composting.
Yes. And viewers who want to learn more about the new composting technology used at Bloedel can visit these web links.
How old were you when you first started gardening?
That question is a little hard to answer specifically. My interest in plants dates back to when I was maybe 12 or 13 years old. My parents often took me and my brother camping and hiking, and I was exposed to nature from a young age. Initially, I was fascinated by identifying plants, especially those wild plants I might be able to eat. I think that interest in plants eventually evolved into gardening, thanks in part to my grandmother, who was an avid gardener and florist. She was a significant influence on my perception of what gardening was and could be.
What are your memories of that time?
I was heavily interested in learning new plants. I was full of curiosity, particularly for naturally occurring species, but also those in gardens.
What about native plants?
I got better at identifying them. I taught myself to use Flora of the Pacific Northwest by Hitchcock and Cronquist. Kind of laid the groundwork for my love of plants and gardenings in my later years.
So it's kind of lasted your life, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
What's your favorite thing about being someone who gardens?
Mostly it's the connection to nature that I feel. Working with plants keeps me grounded, so to speak. It's easy to exist seemingly separate from nature in our modern world. I can grow food and I'm familiar with my natural surroundings, and I feel that my sense of self and security is independent of the modern lifestyle.
Now for the hard question, do you have any favorite plants?
I don't think I have a favorite plant, but for a long time I've been attracted to mosses and ferns. I'm only relatively recently become manager of the moss garden at Bloedel Reserve, and most of my horticulture career dealt with a wide variety of plants, almost to the exclusion of mosses. But even as far back as my undergraduate work, I had begun developing an interest in non-flowering plants, including conifers as well. I feel that flowering plants usually have stolen the show horticulturally, and my love of mosses and ferns as a group is perhaps born out of sympathy for the underdogs of gardening, that is mosses and ferns. The mosses and ferns are so very different from flowering plants that I just find them just so cool.
They are, I agree.
It became possible to get involved with the moss garden at Bloedel Reserve. I jumped at the chance because of both my interest in moss and as a chance to increase people's awareness of other kinds of plants.
I'm glad you jumped at the chance, big time. Anything else you'd like to say about gardening?
Working outside and gardening has probably been a major boost to my health. I couldn't imagine being tied to a desk for a career. I love using my brain for writing or other mental activities, but at some point I just need to move around and be outside.
Yep, I agree. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thanks for joining us for Planted, and to you, Darren, for welcoming us to the Bloedel Reserve and sharing your knowledge.
It's wonderful to spend the day at a first-class botanical garden in Kitsap Gem. Viewers can visit the Bloedel Reserve year-round.
Check out our website, bloedelreserve.org, and Facebook page for special events and visitor info.
Until our next episode of Planted, remember, the more you grow,
The more you'll know.
Links for this episode are posted in the video description.
Thank you.